up, and then I will do a proper introduction. So let me just make sure that everyone can see. So maybe give me a quick thumbs up if you're able to see a kind of angry little dog. There you go. Thank you. And I'm excited to get underway and chat today about this really important topic. So thank you, like Sonali said, thank you so much for being here. This is very, very big topic within dog training, and this is one of our areas of specialty. So I'm excited to chat to everybody today. Just to let everybody know, I have a teenager myself here with me. I have Bentley, who is very big and very mischievous. So if you hear any scratching around or running around in the background, that's probably Mr. Bentley. He's here with me to do a board and train, and we're actually going to watch some videos of Bentley working on his leash reactivity in the presentation. So let's get started, and I just want to introduce myself a little bit. So like Sonali said, my name is Karishma. I'm head of training and behavior at Calm Canine Academy. A little bit about myself and my qualifications. I have a master's degree in analytical ethics. I'm a certified professional dog trainer and a certified separation anxiety trainer. That's one of my areas of specialty. I specialize in separation anxiety and leash reactivity and all of the associated behaviors with that. Calm Canine Academy, as Sonali mentioned, we're a small group of dog trainers and behavior experts. We are based out of New York, but we actually offer almost exclusively digital services, because we find that training the human to train the dog is much more effective than picking up someone's dog and teaching it to do something. I don't know if anyone's ever had their dog trained by someone else, but they tend to come back and those old habits come right back with them. What we like to do here is empower guardians with the information and the expertise that they'll need to change their pet's behavior and their welfare. So it's a really cool little thing that we've got going on. Check us out on Instagram, and there'll be all of our links at the end of this presentation for you to check out. So that's a little bit about me. I worked for 6 years in New York, specializing in leash reactivity, fear and aggression. So I used to spend, 8 to 10 hours a day running around Manhattan and Brooklyn, working with dogs in this hectic urban environment. And that is really where we've become quite niche in our specialty, is that we really do specialize in working in some of these biggest, most challenging urban environments with dogs who struggle with leash reactivity. Let me just get this teenager. Give me 1 second. Bentley, get in here. What are you doing? How did you open this door? I told you there'd be at least one teenage hiccup over the course of this hour and a half, didn't I? Somehow he managed to open that door. Anyone with a dog under 2 years old knows how I feel right now. All right, so let's dive in and have a little look at what we're going to be chatting about today. It's a big topic, so I've split this up into 3 different areas. We're going to just chat over what leash reactivity is, and kind of get the lowdown there. We're going to quickly overview some common mistakes that I'm sure you've maybe made yourself or seen folks make on the streets of your cities working with leash reactive dogs. And then we're going to do a little mini deep dive into treating leash reactivity. This will hopefully take about 45 minutes, and then we'll just take a pause and we'll do lots of questions and answers. I will be looking in the chat as much as I can on the way through the presentation, and I might prompt you guys to put some things in the chat along the way, but at the end I think me and Sonali we're going to pause and have a little like a proper question and answer session, so keep your questions ready for the end. Hopefully we'll get at least half an hour to go through. So let's start straight away talking about what leash reactivity is. So I use this really simple definition. It's an overreaction to everyday stimuli. That is an extremely sort of vague overview, but I want you guys to think, what are the stimuli that trigger your dogs? You're all probably here because you've experienced leash reactivity with your dogs, or a foster dog, or a family member, or a friend. And I want to hear from you guys now before I jump in. What are the stimuli that trigger your dogs, and what are the behaviors that you see associated? While you write that, I'm going to tether this puppy because I thought he'd be able to be loose in the room, but he definitely can't. No, you can't, because you're naughty. Yes, you're a naughty puppy. That's right. So let's have a little look at what we've got coming in here in the chat. Other reactive dogs, so other dogs lunging and barking at your dog, or maybe being loud, dogs that are making noises is a major trigger, and very frequently do I see this. Big fluffy dogs, electric scooters, yes, runners, skaters, so fast moving stimulus. By people shouting at you, I would be a bit stressed out if someone was shouting at my mom too, so I totally get that. Big dogs, so we see a lot of social triggers, and you can go to the next slide here. We can see how common it is to have these triggers. So dogs, people, children, skateboards, vehicles, fast moving objects, stimulus that comes out of nowhere, someone suddenly opening a door. These are things that quite commonly trigger sort of quote unquote reactivity. And I say quote unquote reactivity because it's a big umbrella that we use to describe a lot of different behaviors. That could be something like fixating. That could be a reactive behavior that often we don't really think of as a reactive behavior, just being unable to move away from a trigger. We might see full-blown lunging, barking. We might just see like frantic leash pulling and just difficulty using their processing skills. Let's have a little look at here. Yeah, so helpful. So many of the similar things here. High-vis jackets, raccoons. Oh my goodness, foxes. So other animals tend to be quite common. Yeah, we've got some really good, quite common triggers here, and lots of overlaps amongst the group. And I want you to be thinking about what the behaviors that you see associated with your triggers are. Sonali's posted before on Petminded about the ABCs of behavior: antecedent, behavior, consequence. So these triggers are the antecedents, the thing that provoke the behavior. What are the behaviors that we're seeing? Lunging, barking, frantic leash pulling. And 99% of the time, the consequence is that that thing goes away and the pressure is released from the dog, and they feel, oh, whew, that thing's gone. Good thing I freaked out there. Could have nearly got killed by that big scary skateboard. So in many cases, the consequence is that that scary thing goes away. I'm so glad that you guys all posted that, because we saw so many similar triggers, and so many dogs struggle with this, especially in the urban environment. It's not unusual at all. I think a big question folks ask when they see these behaviors is why? Like, why does my dog do this? And I usually find that there are a few different reasons that could be underlying this. Maybe for some of your dogs, it's just one of these things, but for many, it's a combination of multiple intersecting factors. Oh, I forgot to put my put a subtitle there, but regardless, it's still going to apply. Underlying emotions like fear and frustration, trigger stacking, so seeing multiple stressful things in a day. For many dogs, it works. You know, they bark at the scary skateboard and the scary skateboard goes away. That's a very functional behavior for that animal. And for many others, it's really all they know. They've never been taught anything other than this. So all they know to do is this very normal and adaptive behavior of shouting very, very loudly. We see it a lot with children as well, having tantrums to try and get what they need. And I often think to myself in these moments when my dog is flailing at the end of the leash, or one of my clients' dogs is flailing at the end of the leash, you know, when I'm really frustrated at them, this quote really helps me. They're giving, the dog isn't giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. And I think everyone can probably identify with that feeling of frustration when we have a dog that's kind of flipping out and going, why are you doing this? And I think I really want to just emphasize this idea that usually there are big feelings behind this kind of behavior. These feelings can vary. Some dogs feel fear. I'd love to know if any of you guys have an idea about what your dogs are feeling behind that leash reactivity. Is it feelings of fear and anxiety? Maybe we assume that it's feelings of frustration. The difference usually can be found in the way the dog responds as a trigger gets closer. If your dog is fearful and a trigger approaches, usually that behavior will intensify. Maybe they'll be growling or snapping. If your dog actually really is excited to see that person and is just frustrated, obviously when the person gets closer, that dog will be happy. So I think probably from my experience, you know, 90% of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, we're dealing with fear. We're dealing with overwhelm. We're dealing with anxiety. The other 10 to 20% of the time, we're often dealing with frustration, overexcitement, and a kind of release of that excitement can happen when they are lunging and barking. Let me have a little look at what you guys have said here. Excitement, so he just wants to meet everyone. Fear and anxiety, fear and then frustration. Yes. Anxiety, yes, I love that. This is so helpful. And often we see anxiety because we know it's anxiety because we can look at their whole body and we can see that they're showing other signs of anxiety. Maybe they're panting, maybe they're shaking, maybe their tail is down, ears are back, maybe their eyes are wide. And one thing that I often do suggest is, I don't want anyone to put their dog in a situation where they're going to be reactive, but if your dog is generally quite anxious just outside, shooting some videos of them while walking can be really useful, because you can have a little look back at the video and see what you might miss in that moment when you're on the sidewalk with them. I often even slow these videos down and have a little look at the body language. That's really something that can be helpful if you're working with a trainer as well, to show them what your dog physically looks like when you're out and about, when you're at a distance from triggers. If you're unsure about the emotional underpinning, please do speak to a trainer who can help you figure out exactly what is going on. Guarding behavior. Yeah, so some of these things with foxes or cats, it could be a predatory thing as well, right? Georgia, you're mentioning when it's foxes or cats, they get frustrated and they can't chase them. So we could be seeing some sort of predatory behaviors coming through here. And that is something to be thinking about if you have a herding dog or a dog that's predacious, a dog that's bred to hunt. That might be a contributing factor to their leash reactivity as well. So there could be a potential genetic component going on underneath this stuff. So big feelings, basically. It often works for the dogs because the thing will go away, or they'll get to greet the person because they're like, and then they get to greet the person, so it's functional. And in many cases they haven't rehearsed anything else, so chances are they're going to go to this very easy, accessible tool to get what they need, which is lunging and barking. I would be interested in hearing if anyone has tried any of these methods before. These are things that I see very frequently recommended online. And I'll go through the three very quickly because I want to make sure that we're not making these common errors that can make things worse. So the first one here, which I'm sure everyone's tried at one point, is exposure therapy. They'll just get used to it. We'll take them around the dogs or the skateboards or the people, and we'll get them used to it until they're not stressed out anymore. This is often what happens in an urban environment because we're so surprised by our triggers that we accidentally do exposure therapy, where we try to kind of expose the dog to the stresses and see if they get used to it. George has asked a great question here. Is exposure the same as flooding? Yes, it is. So flooding just refers to a behavior therapy term where we kind of throw the dog in the deep end, quote unquote, right? So in this case, if your dog is reactive towards cars, taking them to the middle of like a city and taking them out of the car and kind of going, okay, we're just going to get used to it, that could constitute flooding. Really, really good question, Georgia. And flooding basically just means exposing the dog to triggers at a level that's too hard for them, and waiting for the behavior to stop, essentially. I very much don't see much success with this method. In fact, I actually see this often making it worse. Kind of like if you have a phobia of water and someone pushes you in the deep end of a swimming pool, chances are you're going to be even more nervous the next time you're around water. I frequently see this as something that happens. So the general idea here is that if we have our dogs, like this dog in the slide here, lunging and barking at the end of the leash frequently, chances are it's going to be making it kind of worse, because the dogs are experiencing stress levels at higher and the trigger at a higher level than they can tolerate, and that could make them more likely to perform the same behaviors again. It kind of makes sense when you say it like that, right? And if any of you have tried exposure therapy, you might have seen the dog behaviors getting a little bit worse. When we see unwanted behaviors being performed like lunging and barking, it's embarrassing. I can say this as someone who has spent many hundreds of hours on the street with dogs lunging and barking. It's often are not treated very nicely by other members of the community, and it's very difficult to not get frustrated. And I've also received many kind people giving me the advice that I need to punish my dog when they do these things wrong. And I think I'm probably fair to say that everyone tries it at one point or another in some degree, even if it's just, no, don't do that. Maybe it'll work. I'm sure we've all tried it a few times and we wouldn't be here if it worked. The reality I often find is that these underlying emotions are really big. The fear that they're feeling towards the skateboard, for example, is often bigger than the fear that they're going to feel towards you if you go, hey, stop it. And additionally, we were looking through looking through the chat, so many of you are acknowledging already that this is often to do with fear already and anxiety, and adding more fear and anxiety to the equation is a recipe for disaster. So we certainly don't want to be doing that. And the same kind of it goes for equipment that can be used to gain more control of the animal. So I often see folks using prong collars or choke chains, or even a very restrictive head halter, and saying, oh, but the dog walks so much better when they're on this piece of equipment. And my answer to that usually is, we're not actually fixing the problem, we're suppressing the behavior. All of those feelings are still there under the surface. It's just like kind of putting a lid on a boiling pot. The water's still boiling. You just can't see all the steam coming off, but at some point it's gonna bubble over, and we need to be addressing the core problems here. Oh, what a great question here. I've seen some really, oh my God, Georgia, a kid screamed that dog is evil. Holy moly, that's not very nice at all. But you know what? People don't understand until they have a dog that is leash reactive like that. And then, I often find people kind of saying, oh my gosh, I feel so bad now for the way that I reacted when my friend's dog did this or something like that. So it is a learning experience for everyone. Goodness me, so frustrating to have the child say that, though. Selena's asked this really fantastic question that I want to answer. So is comfort also an error? This is a fantastic question. So if our dog is struggling, is comforting them a bad thing to do? It's never a bad thing to comfort an animal that's in distress, ever, ever, ever. No animal ever. Think about it like a child. If we had a child that was very afraid, it's never inappropriate to give that child a big hug and say it's going to be okay. And the same thing if you have a reactive dog, if you have a fearful dog, if you have an aggressive dog, it is never inappropriate to tell the dog it's going to be okay, to offer them comfort. And you will even see me, frequently feeding dogs after having a reaction, which people are often very confused about. They're like, wait, why are you giving the dog hot dogs? It just barked at someone. And I'm like, yeah, it barked at someone because it's scared. And so I'm going to give it some hot dogs to make it feel better. And I promise you, it's not going to make the reactivity worse, because we have to change the emotion first. Then the behavior follows. If we try to change the behavior without changing the underlying emotion, we're really going to hit a brick wall, because our dogs can't focus, they can't think, and they can't learn when they are over threshold, when they are being flooded. So Georgia used that term, flooding, when the trigger's too much. If your dogs are unable to eat, if they're unable to respond to their names, they can't learn when they're in that state. So giving them hot dogs after they have a reaction is kind of like giving someone a Haagen-Dazs or Ben and Jerry's after they've been dumped. They're not going to go out looking to get dumped again. They're just going to feel a bit better because they have some ice cream now. If that makes sense. I have a mentor who gave me that analogy once, and I was like, that makes so much sense, because I've definitely had that exact experience, and I'm not going out there looking to get dumped a second time to get more Ben and Jerry's. So I'm like, I'm fine. Thank you. Hopefully that, it's a good analogy, isn't it? Yeah, I'm so glad that you guys now know that you can absolutely comfort your dogs, and understand that you can never reinforce an emotion with your behavior. You can only ever reinforce behavior. So you can't make your dog more fearful by giving them affection when they are fearful. That is literally physically impossible. Impossible. You can potentially teach them to perform behaviors, but I'm getting down a hole here. It's irrelevant. You're absolutely fine to give them attention, and avoid putting them in situations that they can't handle first and foremost, I think. So avoiding exposure as something that we do is going to be a key part of our treatment protocol. So just like me, I'm sure you've all, made these mistakes before. And don't worry if you have. I think often when I go through common errors, I see people go like, oh God, I made these mistakes. And I say this to my trainers all the time: you can't break the dog. If you've made an error in your training or in your therapy, it's absolutely fine. Our dogs are extremely they're optimistic, they love us. They're very forgiving of our mistakes. And so the fact that you're here and we can learn next what we should be doing, That's like the most important thing. So I don't want you to worry too much. I've seen dogs that have undergone extreme exposure therapy for many, many years. You know, they still can make amazing behavior change. Our dogs really are some of the most incredible creatures. They're like human proof is what I call them. We've bred these dogs to be human proof over many years. So we can make many mistakes and they usually tend to be relatively forgiving. All right, so we talked a little bit about some errors that are often made, just doing a quick time check. Let's look at solutions, what we want to be doing. And I have a four kind of pillared approach. I think the most important thing before I go into each individual pillar is to say that each of these different sections are just as important. I feel like we often go straight into trying to train the dog and, you know, work the dog around triggers and go out on walks and stuff like that. We take a very different approach, and most kind of modern science-based behavior specialists will take a very different approach, and it's a very holistic approach. We're going to look at each part of your dog, not just their behavior, and make sure that we're kind of coming at it from many different angles. So let's go into each pillar. We'll start off with management. This one is often, I get the most pushback, honestly, from this pillar. Folks find this one very difficult, and I completely understand. But in a nutshell, we're going to avoid exposing your dogs to their triggers outside of targeted training sessions. Now, if you have a dog that has been reacting many, many times every day, we might just stop walking them completely if that's an option. But I think the question I often get is, if we're avoiding these triggers, how are we going to make behavior change? Think about it this way. We are managing their anxiety condition by avoiding their triggers to stop their body being pushed into a maladaptive stress state on a regular basis. I think it's important to remember that leash reactivity is not an obedience issue. It's a nervous system issue. It's a dysregulation of the nervous system, and it's an anxiety condition. So our job is not to train them or teach them straight away. Our job is to shield them from their anxiety triggers and from the triggers they can't handle, while we work on behavior modification, right? If you have social anxiety, you're not going to go straight onto a stage and start talking in front of 200 people after day one of therapy. Hell no, you're still avoiding parties. You know, you're still not going to lunches with more than 3 people, right? For a few weeks at least. It's the same with this. So I have some tips here for management, and we can look at this little video together while I talk through some of the ways that I help manage, or we help our clients manage leash reactivity especially in an urban environment. So, I mean, number one, if you're lucky enough to have a little dog, or you're lucky enough to have a large house with an outdoor space, we might be able to minimize walks completely. This is often like met with gasps, like, oh, but how could we be good dog owners if we don't walk our dogs? And I am here to say 2022 is the year that I make it normal for you to not walk your dogs. It is normal for dogs to not go on walks in an urban environment every day. That is absolutely fine. I think that we often have this idea that dogs need to go on walks to get exercise, but I'm going to ask you, if you have a golden retriever, Bernedoodle, if you have even a little Chihuahua, I bet that dog could run rings around you all day long for 8 hours a day and not even skip a beat. Walking for 20 minutes around the urban environment is not exercise. It is stimulating for sure, but it's probably not exercise in the way that we want it to be. We can do so much indoors to manage our dogs' kind of energy levels and give them what they need, even in tiny little Brooklyn and Manhattan apartments. So if we can minimize walks, we want to be doing that. If we can't, we want to be avoiding triggers and rehearsing defensive maneuvers. And I have a few defensive maneuvers that I want to show you guys today. I'm going to put the sound off for a second. The first one is called Find It. This is a really easy game where we just teach our dogs to find treats on the floor. So you'll see one of our guardians here is showing the dog the snacks and saying, find it, and then tossing it on the floor. So let's hear them. So she's just saying, find it, as she tosses the snack on the floor. And they're doing this in this kind of urban environment with lots of distance. Find its are particularly helpful to like treat trail your dog past a trigger if you need to just kind of move them past a stressful environment. So here we have a dog who is stuck at the dog park, and his mum's going to use the Find Its to move him away.
So I Find Its to get him out. Good boy. Come on, Find It. Let's go. Yes, Find It. Go.
So it's hardly rocket science, this Find It game. However, our dogs are having these big emotional reactions, so we don't need to be like asking them to do long division. We just want them to get the F out of there, right? So Find Its are especially useful for distracting dogs while triggers go past, for getting their nose on the floor, or like you saw in that last video with the dog in the red jacket, it was kind of looking over there at the distance in the dogs, and his mum just used it to move him away. Again, this is management. This is a management strategy in case you need to get your 100-pound boxer out to pee and poop on the sidewalk on, like, you know, West 22nd or something. You just find it out of the apartment, get them doing their business, and then run back up inside. So the number one defensive thing that I teach every reactive dog guardian is a Find It. You need to practice this with your dogs. Don't just pull it out when the triggers are around. I want you practicing in the house, in the hallway, on the porch. Practice the Find It game. So when you say Find It, your dog's like, oh my God, where is it? So helpful in a pinch if you need to just get their nose on the floor. So the first thing I'll have every dog guardian do to help with management is Find It. The second thing I'll do is teach them a U-turn. So you'll see an example of a U-turn in the next section of the video. A U-turn is a quick about turn. So you can see me practicing with my dog here. I'm practicing a quick turn on the spot. So walking with him, practicing, I'm saying, let's go, and then turning around really quickly. So you can imagine this being used on the sidewalk. You're walking your dog, or you're in the apartment building, they're getting distracted. You can see this dog here, this is Bentley. He's gotten distracted by a dog, and I'm gonna try my let's go.
Which is good, but I'm gonna do a retreat cue. Ready? 3, 2, 1, let's go. Good job, Bentley. In the house, let's go. Good job. That was
so I was able to, you can use this cue to move dogs away in a pinch from a trigger. So I'm actually going to show you that one more time with the sound on, so you can see this is Bentley, who I have in the house right now with me. He is a teenage dog who is quite reactive to dogs. So you can just watch me use my U-turn cue to help him get past this trigger. Let me just get to the right point. Here you go. Ooh, my bad, loves. Sorry. I pressed the wrong button there. Let's try again, shall we? All right, so we'll teach it in like a low distraction environment, and then we can bring it out into real life.
Oh, there's a dog running over there, which is new. So I'm going to step in front of him. Yes, Bentley, and a person right there. Good. He's still eating, which is good, but I'm going to do a retreat cue. Ready? 3, 2, 1, let's go. Good job, Bentley.
So you see how sometimes we need just management tools to get through the day with your dog. So Find Its and U-turns, they're my number one. Every dog that I work with reactivity with will learn will Find It, will learn a U-turn, and that'll help the dog be able to get through daily life. Isn't it? It is ridiculous. And I love that video especially because he was quite fixated. You saw him like looking at the dogs. I even stepped in front of him. I didn't break his focus, but that pre-rehearsed let's go cue was able to kind of pull him away. And if you're in a city, the reality is you're going to need to use this to get away from triggers that surprise you. You might need to take your dogs out to use the bathroom. And so you can be using this for those moments. Yeah, fantastic. I'm seeing some people I love how many people are just like, his ears. I know his ears are ridiculous, aren't they? So fluffy. He is such a silly dog. He's laying down over there. He's been doing so well, and you can see how, you know, in the urban environment, sometimes we're just popping out into the street, doing a little bit of training, and then running back into the house. So you can see these management tactics being extremely helpful in just getting through daily life and minimizing those reactions. So hopefully you guys have got some inspiration on ways that we can be doing, you know, Find Its and these sorts of things with our dogs. The second pillar is this enrichment. So we need to balance meeting their needs with minimizing exposure to their trigger. So Georgia mentioned some really good indoor conditioning exercises. There is so much out there. I didn't really put too much detail in this presentation, because if you look at if you Google indoor dog enrichment, if you look at any of Petminded's IGTVs about enrichment, there are so many amazing resources out there. You can find so many different ways that we can meet their needs. I usually say a kind of combination of these two things. So indoor enrichment, which means to me play and species appropriate enrichment in safe spaces. So an example here is I have my dog Hera, who is a former reactive dog, snuffling for some snacks in a snuffle mat. I'm sure you've all heard of like toys that you can give them their meals in, games you can play inside. I love canine fitness as an indoor activity exercise. I think it's absolutely fantastic. You just give it a quick Google, check out some IG pages, you'll find stuff. So indoor enrichment and decompression walks. So for many dogs, walking in the city, it's just not an option. And say we're working with this dog for a year to get them able to walk in the middle of Manhattan, which I think is a perfectly reasonable time frame to be able to get a dog, super comfortable in the most hectic urban environment on this planet. We might need to take them out for hikes every now and again, right? Maybe we're going to prioritize as part of the treatment plan, getting a zip car once a week and taking the dog out to get a big hike outside somewhere quiet. If we have a 100-pound, Great Pyrenees mountain dog in Manhattan, chances are, we're going to have to get them out in nature, and we're going to have to get them out somewhere a little bit farther away. And I like to be quite frank with folks about this. We are not going to be able to walk them every day in the urban environment if they're reacting to everything that is in that environment. And it can take a little bit of organization and budgeting, etc., and making sure that our resources are allocated in the right places. But a mixture of indoor enrichment and decompression walks, usually we can actually minimize urban walks almost completely. And that will actually see Noelle says I would need at least a year to walk in Manhattan. I mean, 100%. I'm not gonna lie. Like I always say to folks, we're so desensitized to this urban environment that we live in. But anyone who has left Manhattan for a significant amount of time and then come back, you realize, holy crap, this is quite an intense environment. And I always have to remind my guardians that you are working in one of the most challenging environments in the world. It's going to take a little bit longer than Fluffy, who lives in a kind of nice small town somewhere, to get to that end point. Yeah, I love this picture of my dog on his decompression walk, because I think he looks so relaxed and comfortable, nice squinty eyes, looking really, really, really calm. So if we're managing their environment significantly, we're going to have to supplement indoor enrichment, decompression walks, and then a medical consult. So pillar number 3. This one is so often missed, I think, by trainers. The more experienced I get, I cannot tell you how frequently anxiety conditions correlate with GI issues, skin issues, allergies, pain and inflammation. These are so important, and we have to take this holistic approach. That's why I love Petminded, because I know that you bring together a lot of different sort of professionals, from nutrition experts to medical experts to people who specialize in pain and stuff like that. We have to look at all of these different factors. So when we go to a vet, we'll be checking for underlying medical causes, especially if this leash reactivity came out of nowhere. And we're going to be discussing anxiety reducing pharmaceuticals. If you have an Australian Shepherd in Manhattan who is reactive to skateboards, children, people, and dogs, and you have to let that dog urinate outside, we are going to need to speak to a vet about ways we can keep the stress hormones low in their body. Because if we have dogs that are going over threshold and having these panic responses multiple times a day, and there's nothing we can do about it, from a welfare perspective, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep their physical body healthy. There are so many studies out there about how long-term stress can affect the body. It can take years off a dog's life. It's very important that if we are in an environment that is causing stress, that we are giving them the necessary medical care to counteract that. And I'm a huge proponent, you know, many folks now, if they want to join one of my reactivity programs, they have to go to a vet before they're even allowed in the program, because so often I find that if we don't go to a vet, you know, 6 weeks in, we're going to realize, oh, actually they have a luxated patella, oh, there's arthritis, oh, there's this issue. And so we really need to go in right from the beginning. And lots of folks say to me, my dog doesn't seem unwell, my dog doesn't seem like it's in pain, and I'm here to tell you that your dogs will lie. They will lie to you. Dogs are biologically inclined to mask discomfort. So it might not look like there's anything wrong, and we really need a proper vet to double check and triple check and make sure. So I'd love to hear if anyone has any other sort of any other behavior, sort of medical problems with their dogs, because it's so often I see the correlation. Talked about something fitness. What was the name? Canine fitness was what I was saying there, Maria. So you can look up like canine fitness exercises, and you can find some really great stuff on YouTube, great courses that are quite easy to purchase, you know, $20, and you get like 10 different fitness exercises that you can do with your dog, with your dogs indoors. Yes, Dodger, exactly. Canine conditioning and fitness. Katie's asking, are there things you recommend asking the vet to check for? This is a great question. And I will often check for like GI upsets, especially if the dog has already got, you know, sometimes people come to me and they say, oh, he also has, you know, sensitive tummy. That to me, I'm like, okay, we need to double check, triple check. Are there any food intolerances? I often ask vets to check for pain, especially around the rear end. We see lots of dogs struggling with rear end arthritis, dysplasia. The joints are things that we want to be looking at. Checking their knees, especially if they are dogs that have are breeds that are likely to struggle with these things. So for example, I have a beagle in a class that I just finished up with, an older beagle around 8 years old who has separation anxiety and leash reactivity. And I saw a video of this beagle sitting down, and it sat with one leg weirdly out to the side like this. They called it her party leg. And she does sometimes groan when she stretches. And I was immediately like, okay, we need to go to a pain specialist, because I'm like 90% sure that dog has a good deal of pain. So, I mean, really getting a specialist involved, getting trainers and vets involved who know what they're talking about can be really beneficial here. Yeah, because there are trends that we look for, but generally I'm looking for pain, I'm looking for GIs and allergy, and then I'm looking for just like underlying anxiety conditions. If we see a dog that has leash reactivity and also has separation anxiety and also is sound sensitive and also struggles when being touched, big red flag for me. There is something underlying all of those things, most likely, that we haven't quite figured out yet. So I think that's really important, often missed. And we can finally move into our final pillar, which is therapy. I used to call this training, but honestly, I'm moving towards just therapy because it is just therapy. Training is kind of like this old-fashioned term almost that suggests that it's something that's done to the animal. We train the dog, but realistically, the dog is engaging in therapy, and the dog is as active a participant as the trainer. But I am so fastidious and so boring about this, because before we do any therapy, we need to make sure we've done the previous 3 pillars. I just see so many trainers, you know, they see a leash reactive dog and they jump out onto the street and start working. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second, wait a second. We haven't done any of the other things that are necessary. And if we don't meet their needs, if we don't check their medical status, and if we don't minimize reactions, we are going to be spinning our wheels. And I think it's really important to be really upfront. You know, working with a reactive dog can take months or years. We need to set a solid foundation before we get out there and start working around triggers. And I'm also going to just caveat this with, you know, if we're seeing growling, barking, lunging, snapping, very much going to recommend we speak to a professional before taking the dog out into public and working around you know, children and dogs and people. We want to make sure that safety is absolutely number one here. So I always will recommend speaking to a qualified and experienced behavior professional. These things, 1, 2, 3, these 3 steps are things you can do whilst you're reaching out to a professional, whilst you're getting into a program that's going to work for you. So if you need to start right now, these are the things to start doing. Start working on your find its, on your U-turns inside. There's so much to be done before we even step out of the house is kind of my big point here. But let's have a look at what therapy might look like. Woo. Let's have a little look at what some therapy sessions might look like. Sorry for a second, I'm going to pause that. I've got some videos here of me working with Bentley, who's over there. But in general, there are kind of a few things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to therapy. I'm going to talk you through them, and then we'll have a little watch of the video together. We need to start off by changing the dog's emotional reactions. So we usually do this by pairing the scary thing with food or toys, and we often have to work from a distance to start off with. So we need to, because this needs to take place under threshold, meaning that the dog needs to be able to think and eat. How many people, you know, people in this group whose dogs will struggle to even like eat food around their triggers? That's so common. So a week and a half ago, Bentley really struggled to eat food around his triggers. We started off with dogs over 100 feet away in a park and built up to this. Oh, we have doggies with food allergies. Yeah, let me just have a little quick look and check what's going on here. We've got to talk about allergies and intolerances. Yep. This is also helpful. And 80% of issues can be resolved with medical. Honestly, I'm really the more experience I get, the more I am realizing that really is the case, and we often need to do investigation to figure out what's going on. Okay, so we're going to change how our dogs feel. We're going to give them new behaviors to do instead of lunging and barking. Remember, they often are doing that because it works to get the dog to move away, and this will often require setting up learning opportunities for our dogs. So I'm going to hit mute for a second, and we'll just watch the video to start off with. So in this exercise, you'll see I've got a helper dog, this white dog, and I'm working with Bentley on his leash reactivity. So every time he looks at that dog and looks back at me, he's getting a little snack. So I've taught Bentley that, you know, you don't have to lunge and bark. You can just look at me and it'll be absolutely fine. But we started off from a significant distance. How boring does this look? Can I just say? This does not look snazzy or flashy. When we go on TikTok and we see all these crazy videos of people working these reactive dogs and it's all very dramatic and HBO, that's not what it should look like. We don't want HBO training. We want boring training. This is just a dog looking at me and eating food 20 feet from another dog. It is not sexy. But this to me is the sexiest training you can see. Just a dog that looks comfortable, a dog that is relaxed and who's looking at things in the environment and checking back in with me. So you see that white dog coming a little bit closer. And every time Bentley looks at me, he's getting a yes and a treat. Let's have a little listen and see what I'm saying to him in these sessions. Let's start from here. Oh my goodness, I keep forgetting that I can't press. Right, let's have a little look at this session here. So we're really just working on the dog being able to pay attention to me. So you'll see him turn back towards me in a second. Those are the moments we like.
Yes, good job. Lovely check-in. Lovely job, Bentley. Yes. Yes.
So I'm saying yes to Bentley when he does the thing that I like, which is look at me or look at any of the triggers in the environment. So it's a lot of reinforcement.
Good.
You see him thinking. And I'm showing you a few different set of examples here.
Yes. All right, you ready? Okay. Good job, Bentley. Yes.
Right.
Good boy, Bentley. Nice decision.
So what I wanted to kind of point out in this video is that this dog is making these decisions himself. I think so frequently we see videos of people sit down, heel, here. My training, I'm basically silent, other than telling the dog what a great job they're doing. And so you can see here, and just I'm going to push back a tiny bit so I can show you this again. He comes out from behind the gate and he looks at this dog in the distance, and you'll notice him choose to come back to me. Again, very, very unsexy, but extremely powerful if you have a reactive dog, that the dog will choose to come back to the person. So this is what we're really looking for.
Good job, Bentley.
Looking at the dog.
Yes.
And choosing.
Good boy, Bentley. Nice
to move
decision.
away every time. So I'll let this play for a little bit in the background, and you can see really how boring this is. But working with leash reactivity 9 out of 10 times involves setups like this, where we have helper dogs, helper people, helper skateboarders. And we're working at a distance to start off with, from the dog, from the skateboard, from the person, using high value food to keep the dog thinking. So we want the dog to be doing normal things like sniffing, looking at us, eating food off the floor. Very boring, very healthy behaviors. And this often means that we're starting at an extremely big distance and working in setups with people and dogs and children and bicycles that are set up to help the dog be successful. So here I have a person here holding the dog. Let's have a little look in the chat and see what you guys are chatting about. Oh, great question. These some really good questions here. Boring is great, yeah. All right, fab. I'm gonna go in from here. So Ksenia is asking, can the other dog be a dog that they already know? I love this question. So often for dogs that are very reactive, we have to kind of, I call it get our foot in the door. We have to make the distraction easier so that they can be successful. So Bentley, this dog, his first few training sessions were with dogs that he knew already, so that we could rehearse this with a dog that he feels comfortable with. Similarly, if your dog is scared of people, you might be doing this with their dad, with another human that they know very well, just to get them rehearsing it to start off with. Much like, I might rehearse a presentation to my roommate the first time. I'm not actually really nervous, but I'm just practicing with someone, and then I'll do it in front of people later on. It's the exact same thing. Oh, and I love this. Georgia's saying sometimes Dina will take food intensely as a sign of being close to threshold. Yes. So every dog shows different behaviors as they get up to their panic point. Some dogs might start taking the food extra hard. Other dogs might stop eating altogether. Every dog is really different. Similarly, as I get more stressed, I maybe will talk faster. Maybe I will fidget a little bit. Every person is different, and it's the same for our dogs. So you will learn what your dog's stress signs are and what kind of indicates that they're getting close to their triggers, and it all dependent on each dog. So Crystal's asked how far from triggers. This is a great question, Crystal, and I can't give you an answer because every dog is different, right? So for Bentley, for example, the dog in this video, we had to start literally 100 feet away with a stuffed dog, with this dog. We started with a fake dog from 100 feet away. That was a week and a half ago. Yes, that's your friend. Remember him? He's like, huh? Where did that dog come from? Yes, this is a dog. Well done. And we started with someone with a fake dog on a leash practicing this. I know that sounds silly, but Bentley needed that at the beginning, because if he saw a real live dog running around, moving around, he couldn't quite handle that. So I'm really going to suggest that, in an ideal world, you'll be able to work with a trainer who can do an assessment with you and tell you exactly where you should be working with your dog. If you're not in an ideal world, I would suggest either getting a fake trigger like a stuffed dog or a stuffed cat, or getting someone wearing a hat, being a new person, and assess how far away do you need to be for the dog to accept food, for the dog to work appropriately and below threshold. Yuki says she calls that chomping on the food really quickly stress eating. Yeah, I mean, I do it. Hell yeah. When I get really stressed and I'm close to my panic point, I'm very likely to order, a big Chinese takeaway and eat it very quickly until I don't feel very good. Exact same thing from our dogs. I love that we are the same as our dogs, and that's, we're often looking for really similar markers of success for our therapy. The dog to be able to breathe, the dog to be able to stand, the dog to be able to look at you, do all those things that they can do at home. Sonali, I've kind of just gone rogue and I'm just answering questions. Is that okay? Is this okay? I'm just getting some really
totally
good
fine.
Okay,
I did grab a couple of questions from like the top of the hour. So if we don't get to them, I'll definitely call them out for folks.
Thank you,
yeah. So go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, another one here is, should I use the clicker all the time, or is just yes enough? I don't know about you, but holding a clicker and a dog and treats in the middle of a New York winter when you have mittens on is a bit of a pain. So I am more than happy for folks to just use yes as a marker word, because, you know, especially if you have a big dog, sometimes it's just more valuable to keep that hand a spare. I'm absolutely happy with people just using a verbal marker. That's totally fine. Yeah, exactly right. It can be really challenging. And from Yuki, what can be used as a reward for dogs that aren't very food motivated? And this is a really fantastic question, Yuki. And I think there are a few different things here. I love using food because it's a calming reinforcer. It's a reinforcer that calms the dog's nervous system. So you might notice that I was using like some lickable treats in that video with Bentley. If he is close to his threshold, if I give him like this lickable pate, he just goes down. His stress levels reduce so quickly. Similarly, for some dogs, throwing food on the floor, like the Find It game, can be a great way to calm them. So I guess my big question is, with dogs that aren't super food motivated, I wonder, is the dog food motivated in other contexts, first of all? Because often I find dogs are very food motivated in the house, but they leave the house and they stop being food motivated. And then we kind of go, okay, well, what do I use instead? If we can, my number one option is to build that drive for food. And I build that drive for food often by using extremely high value foods and slowly working outside of the home. So I have a fridge full of chicken, steak, and liver, because that's the stuff that really is the big guns if you're living in an urban environment. So my first thing is, can we use crazy, wild, high value foods, and will that make them more motivated to work? Because often I find we're just not using the right food. That being said, there are definitely some dogs who would rather work for a different reinforcer. Very frequently, that's play. And play is an absolutely amazing reinforcer working with leash reactivity, because dogs can't play when they're stressed. So it's a really good way to force yourself to work very far under threshold. I know that someone mentioned that Dina will like chomp up that food really quickly, even when they're quite stressed. Many dogs I know will eat well into being panicked. But there are very few dogs I know who will play well into being panicked. So using play as a reinforcer can be really quick. Yuki is a Shiba with a sensitive tummy and is a bit picky. Yes, so I mean, play can definitely be useful. If your dog likes to get a game of tug or likes to play fetch, you can absolutely use that. And Katie says, yes, my dog is almost too food motivated in the house, but too distracted outside. In which case, I would definitely suggest, Katie, starting to work in between the outside and the inside. That sounds a little bit silly, but many dogs I find, Bentley was exactly like this. If I opened the door, he'd be so distracted that he would no longer eat the food. But if the door was closed, he would do anything for the food. So my first 3 days of working with Bentley, I worked with the door cracked ever so slightly open. You can see a reel about this on my on the Calm Canine Academy Instagram. I made a reel. It's very boring, as most of my training is, where I'm just like cracking the door open and feeding Bentley and then closing the door. And it took us 3 days to get him eating outside. 3 days of working on that door exercise 3 to 4 times a day. But his parents were absolutely dumbfounded that he was eating treats outside. And I was like, wow, it took a good amount of work to bridge the gap between indoors and outdoors. But Katie, it sounds like that's where we need to start. And for many leash reactive dogs, we need to start just getting them in a thinking space outside of the house, right? So we might be starting there and building that motivation to eat outside, teaching them it's safe enough to eat and not overwhelming, not as overwhelming as they think it is. Oh my God, you're teaching a drugs cue. Yes, so you're teaching a to swallow pills cue. That's a really great one. he'll still take treats, it's just not as much. Good. Well, I'm glad that he'll still take them. Let's work on that kind of focus and that ability to stay calm and relaxed in the new environments, I think, primarily, and then moving on from there. No, pleasure, Katie. This is so fun. I love chatting about this stuff. I literally do this 24/7 all day, every day. So I love chatting about this. But that is often my biggest, pardon me. You guys have caught me at the end of a day of teaching classes, so I'm a bit coffee. I think the biggest thing that I'm going to say to folks is that we are often working at a much bigger distance than we think we need to work, for a much longer period of time than we think we need to be working for. And that's actually totally okay. You know, it's just like human therapy. We have to start at the beginning. So if you just spend your training session working on, you know, your dog giving you eye contact, or your dog walking nicely next to you with the door open and just building their ability to focus on you, that is leash reactivity training. That is the first step. So I want you guys to know that that is actually totally fine. If you're just working in the hallway, on the porch, that is not unusual at all. Oh, I have I'm going to just finish my little presentation, and then I'll pause and we can jump out of the presentation, and I'll take all the questions that I haven't already with, like, I can see people's faces a little bit better. I wanted to just finish up today by showing you guys, just giving you a little insight into how we like to treat leash reactivity. We treat it using our 8-week program, and it's 8 weeks. It's actually going to be 12 weeks in 2022, because, you know, it takes a lot of time for us to build this foundation, and our program is digital, so we have folks all over the world taking it, and we really work on engagement and control. So that's that piece, Katie, that I was talking about, getting that control over eating outside, getting calm behaviors outside. We work on trigger counter conditioning. So what are the triggers that we need to work on? How are we going to split that up? At what distance are we going to work? All of these things. And I think for many folks, we really do need a professional to help. Leash reactivity and behavior is complicated. It really is. And even if you're in the middle of nowhere, digital training works if you have a good trainer who knows what they're doing and has a lot of experience. So even if you don't have, you know, a trainer on your doorstep who is as experienced as you'd like, you can dial people in, and you'll be amazed at how much progress you can make without anyone even seeing or touching your dog. It's very cool, actually. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, just jump onto our Instagram, and we have so much free stuff. So follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Instagram's our big one. So check us out there for loads more free stuff, because honestly, I think it's so important to, like, share this information and make it really easily accessible for folks. Like, we can't necessarily tell you all the details about your dog. Like, I don't know exactly how far your dog should be working, but I can tell you the big do's and don'ts for free, because everyone should have this information, because this is just like basic dog care, you know, how to deal with our dogs. And more of these dogs, our dogs are struggling, I think, these days for many different reasons. So yeah, I'm really obsessed with getting this stuff out for free. Oh, thank you, Georgia. That's very sweet. All right, let's deep dive into some of these questions that I might have missed. We have a few minutes. Sonali, did you have any for me noted that I forgot about?
Yeah, so well, first of all, thanks so much, Karishma, and thanks for everyone who's been dropping their questions and responding in the chat. It's always fun to see a busy chat when we're doing one of these, because I can tell people are really into it. So thanks for doing that. We do have a couple of questions that we skipped over. So I'm going to jump into those. And then if you folks have additional questions, I mean, please continue to drop them in the chat. I think Karishma is able to stick around for another 15 minutes or so we can take advantage of that. So one question that came up was around decompression walks, and Yuki had asked this question. She said that a lot of dog-friendly hiking trails have many off-leash dogs with poor recall, which makes me afraid to bring my dog on hikes. Do you have ideas around this?
Yuki, I have to say the most empathy out there for anyone who has to deal with this problem, because it really is every reactive dog parent's nightmare. And I say this as someone who has ranted on Instagram so many times about this happening to me, because it's so annoying having off-leash dogs run up to you and your dog. And there are absolutely things that we can do to help ourselves feel safer, and mostly it comes down to being really prepared and having equipment to help you. So the way that I see it, I assume that there's going to be an off-leash dog, and I want to prepare for what happens in that case. So there are a few things that I will recommend. One thing is we have a blog article called Let's Talk About Dog Attacks. Now, not necessarily exactly what we're talking about here, but helpful because it really overviews what to do in a situation if there are dogs fighting. So just knowing what you should do if something does happen can be really helpful. So check out that article, which goes into it in depth. But a few things you can be thinking about, and this is what I do for my own reactive dog. I always have him on a long line, always have him on a long leash, and I always have a muzzle with me or on him. And my muzzle training is something that we often do for reactive dogs, so that one, other people can see to keep their dogs and their children away from my dog, but also so that if something really does happen, if kind of, you know, shit hits the fan, to say, for lack of a better phrase, we know we know that nothing actually bad is going to happen. The worst that can happen is that there's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of shouting from the dogs, but no one's actually going to get hurt, and that is a really, really huge stress off the guardian. Another thing that I often recommend folks to do is rehearse asking people to call their dogs. So every now and then on a walk, I will grab my dog's harness and go, "Can you call your dog?" Even if there's no one there, just to pretend, so that my dog doesn't go, "Why are you shouting? What's happening?" when I start yelling at people to call their dogs. And then last but not least, I always carry something called spray shield with me when I'm working with a reactive dog. I work with a lot of reactive dogs and have a lot of big scary dogs with me who I definitely don't want interacting with other dogs. Spray shield is legal and safe. It's a citronella spray, but it can shoot citronella at about 15 feet. So if I'm on a hiking trail and I'm getting bombarded by off-leash dogs, I can use that as a deterrent. So for example, you know, I've been attacked by dogs, aggressive dogs, as well as just you know, friendly dogs. In both cases, this can be really helpful. It's non-violent as much as I can be non-violent while still getting the dog to leave me alone. And many cases I just have to spray it on the ground, and it's so unpleasant that the dogs will move away quickly. And it's, in my opinion, Yuki's asking, is this similar to a pet corrector or an air horn? I find them better because it doesn't affect the dog that's being encroached upon. It doesn't affect my dog. A citronella spray that I can spray 15 feet away from me at an oncoming dog is going to affect my dog less than an air horn or a pet corrector. That's a noise, that's an aversive noise, a scary noise, right? So I love, you can just Google a spray shield and you can find it. It's like $15. And you can use that if you need to in a pinch. And I carry this around even when I don't have a reactive dog, because I have been brushed by so many aggressive dogs. And people are like, "They're just friendly," and I'm like, "I am a dog trainer and I can see that this is not friendly. Please get your dog." And I'm sure you've all been in that situation before. Yes, definitely should. So you shouldn't have to drop kick dogs. Yuki, I cannot tell you how much I identify with that. I once had a dog attack me and my dog who was so perfect, and I didn't drop kick, but I kind of moved towards the dog in like in a way to kind of try and scare them off. And then the guardian started yelling at me and I was like, "What do you mean? I'm not attacking you. This is so confusing." So I completely understand, Yuki. It can be so stressful. Definitely grab some of that spray shield and practice using it when there are no dogs around. So buy a few cans maybe and just practice when there are no dogs around, so you know exactly what you need to be doing when that does happen. And having a muzzle is really helpful as well, because it does just give you that extra step of protection. Oh, I've got a great question here about gentle leaders that I think, that are fantastic. So what do you think about gentle leaders? My dog is a bit small and sometimes pulls on his harness. So gentle leaders have a really good name in that they say that they're gentle. And I don't I sometimes do use gentle leaders, I have to say, especially if I have like a 120-pound dog that is just so extraordinarily large, and especially if there's a guardian that's like under 120 pounds, I might then use something like a gentle leader. But with a little dog, I don't want to use equipment that's going to suppress behavior. And that's what gentle leaders do, is that they kind of limit what the dog is able to do. So it makes it uncomfortable for them to pull on the leash because it hits their neck, essentially. There's actually some studies coming out, I don't know if Sonali might know more about this than me, that show that, that pressure on the neck and head area is actually it has the opposite effect. It can actually make leash reactivity worse in the long run because it is an unpleasant stimulus for the animal. So I wouldn't worry about your dog pulling on their harness, especially if they're anxious in a novel environment or around triggers. I would work more on sort of teaching appropriate behaviors and counter conditioning rather than using equipment, because that equipment comes off and guess what, the behavior is going to come right back, right? So we want to actually teach them what we want from them. Yes, 100%. Same with anti-pull harnesses. They can really mess up their shoulders, 100%. We are always working and always weighing up different kind of factors with any dog, right? So we want to use the least invasive, the minimally aversive piece of equipment that's still going to make us see progress with that animal, right? So there are some more cases in which I'd use a front clip harness than I would use a gentle leader, and there are the most cases, if I can, I'll just use a back clip harness. That's the most comfortable for them. Additionally, if you're using comfortable equipment, you have to train the dog well. And I think that that's quite funny. I think that's like funny to say that, but like, it's true. If we're using the most comfortable equipment, we have to use the distance the dog is comfortable with. And that means that our training has to be good. We're not relying on equipment to kind of suppress the behaviors. So I definitely do agree that we want to avoid using these sort of things. Gentle leaders, and if I do use something like a gentle leader or leash pressure on a martingale collar or the front harness, I do my best to teach the dog what they should do when they feel pressure on that leash. So I actually did a reel about that today, and we have like an IGTV live that goes into how to teach leash pressure as a cue to your dog. So there's like there's so many things that we could be doing, but probably want to avoid the gentle leaders as much as possible, unless you have a sort of like cane corso who's over 120 pounds and stuff like that. Ooh, so many good questions in this group. Sonali, did you have another one for me?
Yeah,
And I will answer George's.
There's two, I think, that are sort of related. So I'm going to read those off. But I did want to mention what you said about the new research. I think since 2017, there's been maybe 3 or 4 new papers that have come out that are a good sample size. So it's not being done on 3 dogs. And they've researched positive versus negative reinforcement methods. And it can cause depression. It's not just about obedience and getting the response you want. There are long-term effects of using some of those negative methods. So just something to keep in mind. But Crystal had a great question. She said, why do you think they have so many triggers? I've had my dog since she was a puppy, and right from the start, she hates cars. And then there's sort of a follow-up question from Maya, where she said her dog takes treats all the time, except for when she sees a trigger. How would you address that?
Okay, so helpful. So I think, was it Crystal who asked the first question? I think that was, yeah, perfect. So why does my dog behave this way is such an interesting question. And when we're looking at, especially when people say to me, no, I have my dog from a very young age, why are they behaving this way? I usually look at this model from an ethologist called Kim Brophy. So the model is called the LEGS model. And it's a really nice way to answer that question. Why is my dog behaving that way? So LEGS stands for learning, environment, genetics, and self. And we can look into these 4 areas, and usually that will give us the answers that we need. So let's go through them. So learning, what has the dog learned? So if the dog pre-12 weeks old, if your dog is not exposed to these things like other dogs on leash, skateboards, scooters, cars, if before 12 weeks old, they are not exposed to any of those things, that can be enough. most dog kind of cognitive development and socialization takes place before they even leave their litter. So, you know, you could have done everything right. You could have got your puppy from 9 weeks old and followed all of the instructions, and even still, you know, that might be all that that particular puppy needed to kind of push them over the edge. So learning, we might also see like traumatic experiences taking place. So whether or not you know of one is different, because trauma, how many of you guys had traumatic experiences as kids that your parents didn't clock, right? It's the same with our dogs. I look back when my puppy was young, and I think, God, there are so many times where I'm looking back now with the knowledge that I have going, damn, I effed up there. You were not having a good time. You know, just times where I was walking him before he was ready. A time where, you know, a car suddenly screeched really, really loudly and he startled and peed himself. That could have been enough. There's something called single event learning that happens quite frequently before dogs are 3 years old. So one bad experience can really have a long-term effect. So this learning can play a major part. The environment plays a major part as well, because if you live in the middle of Manhattan, what are the chances of the dog having a super stressful experience? So much higher, right? So the environment is massively going to affect them. Genetics, huge. Learning environment, genetics. If we have a dog that is a hunting dog, herding dog, terrier, protection dog, any of these breeds were often bred to be sensitive to the environment. So I have a poodle. Bentley over there is a setter. These are dogs who are bred to be very taken by fast moving stimulus, to hunt prey. If Bentley sees a bird, we're gone. He's still gone. I haven't got there yet. We just haven't even started the birds yet. So there could be a genetic component. And then self. So self is that last piece, and that often refers to the unique conditions of that animal. So I often will ask questions like, how old is the dog? If it's under 3 or 4, it's still in canine adolescence. So we tend to see a lot more reactive behaviors from dogs of that age. Figures, right? How many of you were more reactive during adolescence than you are now? Quite normal. We also might look for things like sickness, GI, being in pain, as part of that self as well. So usually looking at the legs does give us some idea as to why the animal might be behaving that way. And if you got your dog at, you know, 12 weeks old and they were in a breeder in Ohio beforehand, and then you moved into a city, that could be it. That's all that's necessary sometimes, especially if, like me, they have genetics that make them slightly more predisposed to being anxious, right? So it's kind of like a spectrum. All these different things fold together. But I think a main thing here is you probably did nothing wrong, you know, quote unquote wrong. Sometimes this is just the way it is. And sometimes we never know. Sometimes we just don't know, you know. It's like sometimes I see dogs that come through my practice, they're like 9 weeks old and have crippling separation anxiety. I'm like, how? I don't know. Just genetics, I guess, just luck of the draw. You never really know. But we can always make progress no matter what the case is. I find it just sometimes takes a little bit of creativity. So that was that first one about why. The second one was about the dog eats everywhere except when the trigger is present. I would be interested in hearing what that trigger is, because what we usually need to do, no worries, Crystal, whoever it was who asked the question about the dog stopping eating when the minute they see the trigger, just let me know in the chat now what that trigger is, because what we usually find is that if the dog goes from 0 to over threshold the second they see that trigger, we need to think about ways we can break that trigger up into little pieces for the dog. So for Bentley, we used this stuffed dog at the beginning, and we had the dog standing facing away from him but towards him, because that was the least stressful way that he could interact with that dog, and we did it from a great distance. So we could start off dogs and unfamiliar people, Maya. Okay, fabulous. So let me give some examples of ways we could split that up. We could start off with a familiar person standing Georgia. We could start off with that with a familiar person maybe standing facing away from your pup, and we could start there and see if she could eat around that trigger. Then maybe we have the person turn around. Maybe we're going to have you go off online and Google stuffed dog and find a stuffed dog to buy so that you can start working with a stuffed dog to get your foot in the door. That's often what I call that first state, getting your foot in the door. What degree can the dog eat at? And we're going to start there. So maybe we're going to be working with a stuffed dog. Maybe we're going to be working with a person the dog already knows to start off with for a few sessions. I have one of our clients in New York. This dog was so reactive that he couldn't see a dog from over 100 feet away without completely losing his mind. We literally have been working with him in a car park behind the Brooklyn Museum with a stuffed dog for about a month. We have then graduated to a real dog and now we're graduating to working on the street. So whatever we have to do to get our foot in the door for these dogs, and we might only be working for 10 seconds. 10 seconds at the beginning, that's it. And it's exactly the same thing we do in cognitive behavioral therapy with human beings. We might want to talk about the stressful thing for 30 seconds, that's it. And then we're done. You know, that can be a therapy session for some folks starting at the beginning if they have like complex trauma. And it can be the same for our dog. So Bentley, like I was working with him, just sniffing the outside world through the door crack and eating steak. That was our first training session. I was sending videos to his mom and he was like, what is this? I was like, just bear with me. Give me a week. Give me a week and it will look more like actual training. But that's what he needed to start off with. Georgia Ewan's the best comments in this chat. Yeah, I know, that's quite funny. He does have quite a detailed bum. Who knows? Who knows why? But hopefully that's given you guys some of an idea about how it's really normal for dogs to go from 0 to 100, but through a combination of shielding them from their triggers. And that shielding is so important because right now, if they're seeing their triggers all the time, that neural pathway is being trod every single time your dog is seeing a dog and not eating. It's making it more likely for them to see a dog and not eat in the future. So we're going to have to stop walks. We're going to have to move as far away from these triggers as possible whilst we start working on kind of working with a stuffed dog or working with a friend who is wearing a hat and facing away, for example. I'm embarrassed to say this, but during the pandemic, working with reactive dogs and with puppies for socialization, I literally had people buy masks and wear them. One of my favorite masks that I got people, there was a pack, you could get a mask package of all the United States presidents. And I'd send people these links and I have all these videos of people doing reactivity training with like Obama, George Bush, with a mask on because the dog couldn't tell the difference from 50 feet away. And we needed to start somewhere with these dogs during the pandemic when we couldn't have folks coming over. So you'll be amazed at what these dogs will get tricked with. How long a day do you recommend working with them? Much less than you think is probably my answer, Katie, to that. I can give you an example for Bentley. This dog is here with me for 3.5 weeks and I work with him 4 times a day for about 5 minutes. That's it. That's all he can do. Week 2 in, we're in week 2 now. I'm working maybe 10 minutes at a time, but to start off with, 5 minutes at a time was all he could really tolerate. So short, frequent sessions is what I'd recommend. We want to avoid going out into the environments for like half an hour at a time. Really often short and sweet is what's best. Great question. Really good one. And especially, I don't know about you guys, I really always want like one more go. Come on, you can do it. I'm a really pushy parent. I don't know. I come from like classic South Asian family who, you know, they're like all about the working hard, doing well, you know, just push yourself, you can do it. That's not how therapy works. It has to be softly, gently. It's been one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and it's helped me as well, not just the dogs, but going, the last driver is always the worst, says Georgie. Yes, exactly. So we want to end on that high. We want to end before it starts to degrade, and that often means 5 minutes or less in some cases. Such good questions today. Were there any others that I missed, Sonali?
We'll take this one, and then maybe there is a question about Doggy Daycare. Sydney, I was just about to read that out actually. So she asked, can Doggy Daycare make a negative impact to dogs' behavior? Essentially in terms of leash reactivity, since they're playing all day off leash in an enclosed space?
Oh my God, I love this question. And you've pretty much answered it for me, which is that, yes, I think we talked about those big feelings behind leash reactivity. So usually it's either fear and anxiety, in which case definitely don't put them in a doggy daycare, because that's not going to be a scenario that's going to help. That's kind of like someone with social anxiety, you know, going to like a dive bar, like that's not ideal. And the second emotion is frustration, overexcitement, and often it's like an explosion of like excitement and then arousal and frustration. So usually the dog's physical body gets really excited. That's what Bentley is dealing with majoritively. I think he's like 90% excitement, 10% nervous. It can be a combination. And if you have a dog that is a kind of high drive dog, so a dog that's likely to go 24/7, like my dog Hera, if they go to a daycare, particularly in an urban environment, most of these daycares are quite small and tend to be quite busy, because, you know, if you're in Manhattan and you're renting a daycare facility, you're probably going to have to pack that full of dogs to pay rent, right? Not only are they quite small and often quite busy, they often are full of party animals. They're full of the most party animal dogs in the neighborhood. I literally think of these like daycares and dog parks. I think of them like the Canal Street dive bar, you know, where people are like, woo, like until like 3 a.m. Now, for some dogs, that is totally appropriate. For some people, that's totally appropriate. But for others, super inappropriate, right? If I have a 2-year-old poodle who barely can contain his excitement upon seeing his friends, I might not want to put him for 8 hours in the Canal Street dive bar going woo to his heart's content, because likely that's going to kind of promote some unwanted patterns in their in their behavior. And what it tends to do is it tends to end up with dogs that see another dog and have this extremely explosive, classically conditioned response where they go, oh my God, now we're going to play for 8 hours and be complete lunatics. And yeah, definitely not what we always want to be, promoting. So for Bentley, for example, I'm promoting calm behavior around other dogs, relaxation. We're doing a lot of like naps with my dog in the room, trying to teach him to just chill and be calm around other animals. So totally agree that I don't think that that daycares are always appropriate. In some cases, I think they can actually make it like 10 times worse. So yeah, definitely, especially if we're dealing with hyper arousal, frustration, we might not want to be popping them in a daycare. And if we do, make sure that the daycare takes breaks regularly, nap times, they separate the dogs for rest. You know, if your dog's under 3 years old, likely they should be sleeping for like 12 to 18 hours a day, and they definitely are not going to be getting that in a daycare setting. So just definitely think about that a little bit. Working line beagle in the city, oh, that nose is going to be onto the floor 24/7, scarfing up everything, I can imagine. Fab. I think I've answered all of these ones down at the end. I think I can maybe take one more if there's any more we can finish on the hour.
Yeah, so I think if we have time for one more, Katie just popped in a question. She said, my dog was rescued when he was about 1 year old and neutered when we got him, but he is still reactive to other male dogs who are not neutered. Not all of them, but once in a while. Is there anything that can be done about this?
Fab question. So we call that intact phobia, when dogs struggle specifically with unneutered dogs, unneutered male dogs. It's not unusual at all. And there are things that can be done about it. We can work on building confidence around neutered males. I would be thinking though, Katie, if you're coming into my private practice, for example, I'd be thinking, you know, what is it about the male dogs that he does react to, that is there some sort of correlating factor? So is it the male dogs that are super interested in him that your dog is struggling with? Is it the big dogs that are unneutered that he's struggling with? What exactly is it about those individuals that he is struggling with that makes him struggle? If there is no rhyme or reason, I would probably clock it up to something called trigger stacking. So different triggers stacking throughout the walk or throughout the day, and then causing him to kind of pop off randomly. I think that there can be things that are, that can be done with this, but I would need more information, I think, before I gave you any more specific advice, unfortunately. But it is interesting to also know that it's very normal for males to not love other intact males. Honestly, from my perspective, I usually just say manage the condition as much as possible, and try not to have them interact with too many unneutered males. From like a scientific perspective, it's actually very unusual for unneutered males to get to like for adult male dogs to interact like that. You know, the way that we interact with our dogs quite frequently, walking around the town, saying hi to everyone. Oh, hey, how's it going? You know, interacting with other dogs. That might not be the best thing for your dog. It might just be that they stay away from adult male dogs and just know that that's normal, and that's actually perfectly normal, and there's nothing actually wrong, nothing wrong with your dog necessarily for struggling like that. Was a kind old golden. Okay, that is, we don't really know why. Difficult to know exactly why. I think that was you say it was the first one he went after, Katie. I would be interested in you keeping a trigger record with your pup. That would be my next step for you. If you were in my private practice, I would say I want you to keep a list of all the dogs that your dog reacts at. Make some notes, because there are so many different fast things that could be going on here. It could be that the kind old golden was maybe a little bit weaker, and your dog was like, oh, I can get away with this one. Maybe it's to do with the size. If it was old, maybe it was moving in a funny way, limping, for example. These are all things that are popping into my head as like potential factors going on. So a trigger or a reactivity log can go a really long way, especially if you then bring that to a trainer and say like, hey, look at this. They'll be like, oh, we love you, with lots of data for us to go off. Yeah, good question.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Karishma. This was so great. I think I can speak for everyone who's here that it's always so much fun learning from you, with all the great stories and examples and the humor. Rachel said, thank you. This was great. And thanks to everyone for coming today and asking all these great questions. I think it's so cool to see how many people struggle with similar issues. I will say, if you want to drop in your Instagram handles and if people have connected because your dogs have similar issues, go ahead and do that in the chat, because sometimes it's helpful to know people who are in the same boat. But also, I will be sending out information on Calm Canine Academy. I think they have a leash reactivity program coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that, and also follow them on Instagram. I think it's at Calm Canine Academy. Is that correct, Karishma?
Yeah, I think we'll give you all like a discount for that our reactivity class, or like 20 or 30%. I'll ask my admin people, but we'll send that through with Sonali when you get all of that info out. So if anyone does want to join and check it out, yeah, we'll definitely give you guys a little.
Amazing. Thank you. That's always lovely. It's a good added incentive, especially at the end of the year. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. This is actually the last public Petminded event of the year. We have a few members only events, but I'm really glad we're ending on such a great note. What a great topic. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you at other Petminded events with scientists and experts like Karishma. And maybe we'll have Karishma back in 2022 because these always seem to go so well. So thanks again, Karishma. This was lovely.
Such a pleasure, my loves. Thank you all so much and for asking such fantastic questions. And I hope to see you around the internet.
Definitely. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close out the call and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.